pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Work session call to order.
All right, this morning we have a time certain item on the agenda for 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead. First of all, are there any changes to the agenda related to the time certain item?
Good morning, Commissioners. We do not have any changes for the 9 a.m. time certain. I have one other change regarding item number 7.
Okay, we'll discuss that in a little bit. So, and for clarification, the time certain is legislative, so it doesn't require anybody to be sworn in to provide testimony. So, Ms. Barrett, could you go ahead and introduce this item, please?
Good morning, Lisa Barrett with Building and Development Services. And as Mr. Connolly just said, this is a legislative matter. This is PA 1708, Ordinance 1804. This is the county-initiated text and map amendment, process improvements to the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan. And the amendments are to the goals, objectives, and policies within the various chapters of the plan as are outlined in your staff report and the ordinance title that is entered into the record. This hearing before the Planning Commission is for the Commission to make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners for the transmittal of PA 1708 to the state as required by Chapter 163, Part 2 of the Florida statutes. This is a county-initiated amendment, and therefore staff is recommending a recommendation of transmittal to the Board of County Commissioners. And I'm going to give a brief summary of why we are here and how long it has taken us to get to these amendments. Last month, we did do a workshop before the Planning Commission, and prior to that, to the Board of County Commissioners. Really, the amendments that are actually before you today have been in the works for 2 years, but it's been quite a bit longer than that. Looking back at some of our drafts that we have obtained from our consultant, they really started back in 2011 with the direction of the Board of County Commissioners. And I don't know if everybody from the Planning Commission was here at the time. Some of you may have been. But at that time, we had proposed some amendments to go before the board, and they went through the amendments at the Civic Center. And at that time, it was a pretty comprehensive rewrite and reorganization of both the comp plan and the land development code. And the board gave us direction to bring the amendments forward in more of a breakdown or by phase. So as you all know, in 2015, we had the rewrite of the land development code. That was really what we called phase 1. And then in 2016, we brought forward the urban corridors. And now today we have before you what we're calling the third phase, or what we are calling process improvements to the land development code and comprehensive plan. And now that everyone has had a chance to read the staff report and the actual amendments, I'm hoping that there's a better understanding of what we're bringing forward before you today. During the presentation that Pat Tajewski with S&ME Consultants will be going over, I want you to keep in mind two major ideas that we're proposing with these amendments. One is really what the function of the land development code and the comprehensive plan are meant to be. And then two, that with the amendments we're trying to provide opportunities for more compact development, affordable housing, and providing services where the residents exist today. For the first subject, keeping the plan and the land development code as separate documents has been a big issue in the last really 20, 30 years. Our comprehensive plan, the way it was written, has really functioned more as a land development code. And the intent of the comprehensive plan is to be the policy direction of the Board of County Commissioners and where the county wants to see the growth and how that growth may be controlled. And that implementation of those policies in that direction should really be in our land development code, the land development code regulations. And that's what we're trying to accomplish with these amendments today. Because we do have a very complicated system, and that's what we're trying to focus on, uncomplicating the system. And before Pat goes through her amendments, Margaret's going to come up and just talk about some of those complications that they exist for not only staff, but applicants, engineers, architects, developers, and the citizens, and how we can better approve that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Margaret Tusing with Building and Development Services. As Lisa just said, our comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 1989, and it was written as more of a regulatory document than a policy vision document. And the consequences of that have been that we basically have 2 land development codes. Our goal, as Lisa has said, is that we want the comprehensive plan to become that vision policy document that it's intended to be, and that the regulations that are necessary to implement those visions and policies are located within the Land Development Code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to tell you a couple of stories about how our development currently works today in Manatee County, what the process is. I want to build a residential development. I have a piece of property, it's 20 acres. My zoning is RSF, and I have future land use of Res 3, which allows me 3 dwelling units to the acre. Perfect. I want to build residential. I want to do 60 dwelling units. I'm good to go. My next idea is I want to build a commercial project. I have 3 acres of property, zoned general commercial. It has a future land use of ROR, which has a 0.35 FAR, which is how you determine how much square footage you can do on your land. Again, perfect. My commercial use is a permitted use in the table. I want to build 45,000 square feet of commercial. I should be able to go, submit my plans, get a permit. My third scenario is I want to do a mixed-use project. I want to do some office and then have some residential on top. That will kind of address some affordable housing issues that we have. That will be some apartments that people could live in. Again, I'm on that same 3-acre parcel. I'm general commercial zoning, and I have future land use of ROR. It has a density of 9 dwelling units to the acre in the 0.35, and it's a mixed-use future land use category. Again, meets the number of square feet I want and meets the minimum units that I want, which is 27, 9 times 3. Since each of these projects meets the requirements of both the comprehensive plan for the density and the floor area ratio and the land development code for the use, I come to the county to submit my application. And I am told I can't because there's other information that I didn't look at in the comprehensive plan. I said, what other information? Well, for the residential, it's density. 3 doesn't equal 3. 3 equals 1. If you have more than 1 dwelling unit to the acre, you're a special approval, and you have to rezone to plan development. I already have residential zoning. Floor area ratio, 0.35 doesn't equal 0.35. It equals 0.25. So because I'm more than 0.25, I have to go, I'm a special approval, and I have to rezone to plan development. For my mixed-use project, and this is probably one of the most interesting, I'm proposing a mixed-use development. Oops. Your mixed-use development, you're a special approval, and you have to rezone to plan development. And again, my FAR is too high, and my density doesn't mean 9 9 means 6. So these are the examples of what people look at today when they look at the Land Development Code. They have the right zoning. They have, what they want to do is what they, the density is what they want to build. The square footage is what they want to build, but they can't. So, and then the question sometimes is, will any of these projects be any different going through the plan development process than they would be going through the standard zoning process? Will the number of units be different? No. Will the square footage be different? No. Will the project still be mixed use? Yes. So in each scenario, you're not really getting a different project at the end of the plan development zoning process. What you're getting is extra time, money, uncertainty into the process. Our current land development code addresses open space, setbacks, height, buffers, etc. for standard zoning districts, just like the planned development zoning district does. Sometimes I think that's lost because people think that somehow planned development is different, is better, has more restrictions to it, when in fact it doesn't. So from a staff position, all of these projects would look the same, be the same. You would have the same intensity, you would have the same density. However, as I stated, the differences are extra time, expense, uncertainty for the property owner or developer. And then there's also something that most people don't see. It's the lifelong reliance on this planned development zoning district that as staff or customers, you have to always look up your development order to know what can I do, what use can I do, what are my setbacks, so and this is forever. And it also has time limits to it, you know. A site plan is only good for 4 years. So if you don't build your development within the 4-year time frame, you have to come back to the Planning Commission and to the board. So it really is complicated, and it's forever. And as Pat will mention in her presentation, we have over 45% of our developed property zoned planned development. So it is a very time-consuming, and you just can't. In the Land Development Code, if you're general commercial zoning, you can look up what uses you're permitted to do. You can look up your setbacks. You can look up your height. You can look up your floor area ratio, and you know exactly what it is. It's a very simple process. Planned development is not a simple process after the fact, and it runs with the land forever. So how will our process improvements that we're proposing to you to change the requirements? In the residential development, the density, 3 will equal 3. So you do not need to rezone to planned development just to get the 3 dwelling units to the acre. In the commercial development, the FAR is 0.35. In the future, it will equal 0.35, and you are not required to rezone to planned development. In the mixed-use project, a mixed-use project will not have to seek special approval because it's a mixed-use project in a mixed-use land use category. And it will also not have to do it because of density and or intensity. Planned development will still be an option. So if you want to change your zoning to planned development, you can still do that. And one of the other great features that I think will make it easier for staff as well as the general public and developers and design community is that we will have a table in the Land Development Code showing all of our future land use categories and then what are the appropriate zoning within that. So you would know what would be an appropriate standard zoning district to apply. So I'm hoping this kind of gives you a picture of what happens every day in the zoning office as we talk to people or try to answer questions about what happens and why you see so many planned developments come before you. It's not because there's something unique or special about the project. It's because they are forced or required to rezone to planned development. So now Pat will go into the details of our process improvements, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Pat Chayeski with SNME. So I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to take you through, and it's going to look very familiar with it because it's very similar to what we presented at the work session. We're going to talk about the background that Lisa touched on a little bit and the purpose of this phase. And the issues that we're going to talk about more specifically are the special approval and plan development that Margaret mentioned, and the relationship between the future land use and the zoning. And then we're going to give you some specific examples of things that would require special approval or plan development, and they include clustering, mixed use, affordable housing, and creating activity nodes. And then I'm going to talk about the schedule last. So as Lisa mentioned, we started doing this a long time ago. Now the first phase, even though there was a lot of work involved, we didn't really make changes to the regulations or the policies. It was just a reorganization of the Land Development Code. It was just to figure out what was in the code, because it was, what happens when you start amending the codes over the years, things start falling into different sections, and it makes it more difficult to find them. So when we did this reorganization, we put all the parking regulations in one place, all the definitions in one place, and all the standards in the different chapters. So it was just to figure out what we had in that land development code. Then we came back later and started focusing on the areas that were of most importance at the time. And we figured that it would be a good idea to just dedicate some time to the urban core of the county. What's wrong in that area? Why is development shying away from that area and instead going towards the interstate? So that was the whole exercise that we did, trying to allow mixed use, allow higher densities and intensities in the urban area of the county. And the new phase that we're working on, like Lisa mentioned, is called process improvements, because basically what we're trying to do is look at the plan and look at the land development code and figure out why are we making it so difficult for certain types of development to go through the process, basically, to get approved. So we discovered that we have too many requirements for special approval, we have too many requirements for plan development, rezoning, and we have too many requirements if somebody wants to do affordable housing, which is kind of counterproductive, and trying to create a sustainable community, trying to allow commercial nodes in certain areas. We're just putting too many obstacles to try to achieve these developments. So I want to start with special approval. So when you look at the comprehensive plan, like Lisa mentioned, this was established back in 1989 when the county was going through the rewrite of the comprehensive plan, and they decided that there were a lot of activities that would be allowed in the county, but they didn't have the specific regulations in place. So they thought, well, we're not going to get those regulations overnight. So to make sure that these activities happen the right way, we're going to require them to go through a special approval. Now, special approval doesn't mean that everything goes to the board. Sometimes it's the board, but sometimes it's designated to somebody else. It could be the planning commission, it could be staff, it could be a different approval authority. And the purpose of going through that process was to make sure that that activity was not going to have a potential impact on natural resources, adjacent land uses, and public facilities. Those were the three main key issues. So the process was created, and then later in the Land Development Code, staff created a table listing all those instances that would throw you into the special approval process. Now that table is not all-inclusive because we have found other instances that were not listed. But we have over 50 different activities that would send you through that special approval process. So to give you just a recap of what type of activity would send you through that approval process, Margaret mentioned if you do certain uses or a mix of uses, that would send you through special approval, even if the zoning, even if the future land use allows you to do that. If you exceed certain densities and intensities, the example that Margaret mentioned. Now, something that it's sometimes confusing to people. You know that every property has a zoning designation, but it also has a future land use designation. If your zoning says RSF 3, that means residential single family 3, you can do up to 3 dwelling units per acre. However, if your land development, if your future land use classification says residential 3, it does not guarantee that you're going to do 3 dwelling units per acre. You have to have the right zoning anyway. Because if you have residential 3 future land use, but your zoning is A, you still would have to change your zoning to get to that 3. However, we make it even more difficult by saying that even if you are going to rezone your property to that RSF 3, you have to go through a special approval. And it's like, wait a minute. When you do any type of rezoning, it has to go to the board anyway. It goes through the planning commission and then the board. So why are we doing 2 different approvals on the same type of application? So it starts getting a little bit confusing. And I don't think you have ever had a situation where you denied the special approval and approved the rezoning. So it's kind of, in many cases, duplication of efforts. And the same thing happens with commercial development. The comprehensive plan, not the code, the comprehensive plan says, oh yeah, you can have commercial, but if you exceed so many square feet, you have to go through the special approval. There is an interesting one here that it says if you expand this land use category, it's called industrial urban, if you expand that land use category, you have to get special approval. But guess what? When you expand any land use category, you have to go through the planning commission and the board and the state. So why do we require that? I'm not so sure. Then there are certain land use categories that were created at the time. They included mixed use, attraction, can't remember the name of that one, major attractors, and mixed-use community. And at that time, the county didn't have specific zoning districts that could implement these categories, so they decided, well, anything that happens in those areas, let's just send them through special approval. And then the other one, for example, it's when you're in a watershed district or a coastal area, you have to go through special approval. And for some people are afraid when they hear us talking about changing something about those watershed overlays or coastal areas. What we're trying to do here, we're not trying to water down the regulations. We're not trying to, change what you can or can't do in those areas. All we're trying to do is make sure that the process that they could go through is the appropriate process and there is no duplication of effort. Affordable housing we talked about already. Clustering. Clustering is something that the comp plan says we want clustering. We want people to preserve open space. We want to allow people to keep some agricultural on their sites. But we want it, but at the same time we're going to give you a hard time trying to get clustering. And then mitigation techniques. There is something so simple that in the comp plan says that if you have to require buffers to make two adjacent uses compatible, most people would do buffers. Say, you put a 20-foot buffer with so many trees and shrubs or walls or whatever. In Manatee County, we send them through special approval and sometimes plan development. So as you can see, we're just trying to make the process simpler and so that it makes more sense. So the bottom line for special approval, so after going through that 50-plus activities, we realized three things. Number one, if we have regulations in place, or if we're creating regulations as part of this process, which we're doing, then we don't need that special approval requirement, so delete that requirement. Some applications may need an additional review. Maybe it's not as simple as saying I meet zoning, I meet future land use, go ahead and approve it. No, some applications may need a little bit more overview by the county. So we're just specifying a different type of approval. Sometimes it's administrative, and sometimes it is special permit. Now, special permit, I want to do a parenthesis here. Sometimes people are not very familiar with what special permit means. In other communities, it's called special exception. Other communities call it conditional use. Basically, it is when you're going to have a development that would most likely be okay, but you need some public hearing to make sure that everybody has a chance to review the compatibility and make sure that it's not going to have an impact on the surrounding areas. So we have a number of uses that already have to go through that process. The county has a pool of hearing officers that meet in this room, and they review those applications, and the public can participate, and they can present their comments and objections. So it is already a process that is in place. So a lot of the activities that we noticed were requiring special approval may be able to go through that process instead. And then we did find a few that we felt they still needed to go to the board for approval. And typically are those who say, for example, these are the required setbacks. However, the board may modify those if they determine that there is an overriding public interest type of situation. So we're saying, yeah, those will continue going to the board. Now, when you go through your packet, there is a technical support document that has a series of memos. Those memorandums include just background on how we derive to our recommendations. And for the special approval memo, which is number 1, in the back there is a table. The table lists the 50-plus activities that I mentioned, and the second column is our commentary on what we're proposing to do with each one of those. If it is delete this approval or instead send it through special permit. So that's all specified there. So I'm going to move into plan development now, but I wanted to know if there are any questions about special approval.
Yes, I have a question. The special approvals will be heard by a official? What's the...
No, special approvals, are you saying special approval or special permit? Because special approvals, we're getting rid of the term.
Special permits.
Yeah, special permits go through the hearing officer.
The hearing officer.
And we have several hearing officers in the county,
mm-hmm.
and they have advertised public hearings. They're not televised, but that's something that could change.
Right.
When they meet, is very similar to your meetings where, you know, the staff will present the case, the applicant will present the case, and then the public will come up and give comments. And the idea of those meetings is that the applicant or staff will present, you know, it's all evidence-based. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, do they meet the standards? Is it going to be compatible? Is it going to impact the surrounding areas? And then they issue an approval or denial. Now, if they deny it, the appeal process is not to the board, it goes to the courts. Mm-hmm. That's one difference.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. It's appealable to the courts, not to the Board of County Commission. Is there an opportunity if an applicant wished to have it go to the board instead of a hearing officer? Is there an opportunity for that?
I would let Sarah answer, but I don't think so.
I got a quick question. The hearing officers, who are they selected by? I mean, are they local attorneys or are they?
I'll let Sarah answer.
Mr. Chair, there's an advertisement placed in the Florida Bar News and also the local attorney newsletter for anyone who's interested in applying, and we give them an orientation on the quasi-judicial procedures. They hold hearings as much as you do here.
Right.
Okay.
And there's mailed notice and posted notice and newspaper notice for any public hearing.
With regard to my first question, is there an opportunity for somebody to ask for the board to hear it instead of a?
No, it's the full hearings at the hearing officer, and anyone who's aggrieved by that can appeal to circuit court. Mm-hmm. It's appeal on the record. All the testimonies before the hearing officer.
Okay, Mr. Roth.
I've only been here 14 years. Can you tell me why the system was so complicated? Did someone want it to be that way to avoid growth, or what was going on?
It was, and we have heard it from people who were here at the time, that in 1989, when they created that special approval, they were afraid that we didn't have enough regulations in place. Now, we have adopted regulations over the years. So now, in the old days, for example, if you were next to a perennial stream, it was like, well, let the board decide what that setback should be, because, you know, we don't have the regulation in place. Well, now, if we look at the code, and we're going to be talking about the land development code in the next few months, we are going to have that setback. So if the developer comes in, they know that number is in the code, instead of going to the board and asking, what do you think it should be? Should it be 20? Should it be 30? So it's going to be that we're going to require people to meet the code.
And Mr. Chair, if
Yes,
I could add, as you all know, you've heard me mention the Kunz case.
Mm-hmm.
That changed. There was a game changer. Before that, pushing public hearings to the board, there's more of a negotiation process. We would like you to dedicate 20 feet of right-of-way. Could you accommodate that? And the applicant says, yes, I'll agree to that if you give me, 20 more units. And it was give and take. But with the Kunz case, the U.S. Supreme Court said, you have to follow the code and comp plan, have those standards objectively stated in your comp plan, what the buffer is, what your units are. So what the consultant is saying is absolutely correct. We have more legally defensible decisions if we're basing Plan Commission board action on what the code and comp plan state. It appears to be arbitrary if you come up with numbers to try to make exactions off the cuff of the hearing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mr. Rutledge.
So, good morning.
Good morning.
So, is the special exceptions model, because I've been through other counties where this is the model, and it's not really any faster, it's not any less expensive, because it's still a way to set you aside, set you through a process, and it doesn't necessarily, you still have a board, you still have to design for it, you still have to meet. And so my question is, why is that faster, stronger, and smarter than what we're doing today?
Yeah, now, we're not sending all special approvals through special permit. We're not doing that. We're going one by one and saying some of them, that can be administrative. That they can just go through building permit. So that list of 50 plus, and I haven't counted to see how many, but let's say half. Half of them are going to be administrative, and maybe a quarter are going to go through special permit now, and maybe the other quarter still go to the board. So the ones that still need to go through the special permit, special exception process are because they are not deemed to be compatible.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, for example, when you do a daycare in a residential neighborhood, you know that it would make sense to have it close to the homes, but it's not going to be as easy to approve it in just any block within the residential neighborhood. So those situations, we know that they need to go through some type of process. So it's not everything.
So So it seems to me, knowing our staff as we do, they're not empowered to make those decisions as a staff decision then, right? Is that what you're saying now currently?
Yeah, right now, all those situations that we talked about, they have to go through a special approval process.
It's not administrative, they get bounced up.
Some are, a couple I think we found that are administratively approved for special approval, yeah.
Okay. So my other question then was, based on all of this, if we have a standard that 45% are becoming PD designs, what do you think the goal would be? Like what percentage of deals do you think should be PD?
We're going to talk about PD next.
Sorry.
See how complicated it is? Now it's
Fantastic.
just special approval.
I know, of course, I'm sorry. I'm trying to look ahead of the ending here. So, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of plan development, so when the plan development was established in the comprehensive plan, there is a quote that I found in the comprehensive plan that says, providing for a planned unit development review process that minimizes the duration of reviews and the number of discretionary approvals. And if you have gone through PD approvals, you know that they are not fast, and the discretionary approval it's just the opposite. Because basically when you do a plan development, there is a lot of room for negotiation in terms of the regulations and what happens on this site. So, we know what the board was trying to do at the time. They wanted to create a process that would be easier for good developments to happen. But it got complicated. And what Lisa was saying, we took a picture of the map, the zoning map in the county, and realized that anything west of the future growth boundary area, more than half of that is already planned development. So what that means is that all those properties are not subject to your land development code. They're subject to a development order that was approved just for them. So Site A has one set of regulations, Site B has a different set of regulations, and Site C has different regulations. So if a neighbor comes in to the permitting counter and they say, I want to know what's happening next door to me, what could they do in the future? Could they build something, 3 stories? Could they build commercial? Staff can't just look at the code and give them an answer. No, they have to go and dig that ordinance, find out what they approved at the time, and how much they have to rely on the code and how much they have to rely on that ordinance. So it makes things complicated for the owners, the neighbors, staff, and everyone involved. So we're not trying to get rid of plan development, because plan development still works okay for certain situations. What we're trying to do is avoid requiring it for so many different activities that don't really need it. Some examples. So we have 2 land use categories. One is called Urban Fringe 3 and Mixed Use. Anything that happens in those categories has to go through PD. If you're going to mitigate impacts on adjacent uses, you have to go through PD. If you're going to do density intensity above a certain level, you have to go through PD. If you're going to mix residential and industrial, same thing. If you're going to do affordable housing density bonuses, PD. Even if you're going to do a 3,500 square foot commercial use associated with a permanent roadside agricultural stand, 3,500 square foot, that's like a home, that requires you to go through PD. So we went one by one, trying to figure out when is it really worth going through that process. So the bottom line was PD was typically required when you needed to make 2 uses compatible. So we figured we can address that through buffers. The code already has a chapter dedicated to landscaping, screening, and buffers. Establishing new zoning districts. So yes, those 2 land use categories that I mentioned, UF3 and mixed use, the idea of sending them through PD was that we didn't have zoning to implement them. Well, let's look at what we have in zoning and let's create some new districts so you can use zoning. And then the special permit that we talked about. Some of these situations that we're just sending, like the 3,500 square foot building, instead of going through PD, which is a very complicated process, maybe it is a special permit. So we went through all those, and same thing, that memorandum number 2 lists all the items that require PD, and we wrote next to them what would we suggest doing instead. Now, we still have some land use categories like the public, semi-public, the major attractors category, and the Florida International Gateway category. Those are very unique type of categories. Like if you think of like a stadium, we wouldn't want to write standards in the land development code for stadiums, because how many are you going to get, over the life of the code. So in those cases, it's better to go through a PD rezoning. And then, of course, voluntary basis. If you want to do PD because you think that your product is going to be unique and it's not going to fit within the Land Development Code regulations, you can still do that. So now I'm going to open it up for questions regarding PD.
Mr. Rutledge?
So, God bless you that you read all these codes. So but I'm having a difficult time because I've been in a number of counties developing, and I can tell you that it's not the mechanics of how they do things, it's how they execute things. And so you saying that I'm going to move this to a thing now called a special exception, or if it still has the same mechanics to it, and you say, well, then everybody's going to opt for the PD. So, you get these mechanics and you set this code up, it's okay for 10% of the deals because they don't have any buffer changes. They don't have a curb cut. They don't have a resident behind them. They don't have flying elks or whatever they have next door that you can't impact. So my question is, why is this really an improvement other than a change? I get that it's a change.
No.
Tell me why you're going to make it faster, cheaper, and better for the majority, this 45% now down to 10%, because you don't have that. I still don't understand that.
As we go through the PowerPoint, there will be more answers to that, more answers to that question. But in general, we can't make it just super easy for everybody because we know that there are some instances that require some type of public overview. Sure. So that's what we have been doing, just sorting them out, figuring out which ones are just overkill, and we need to just make it easier because it doesn't make sense to make them go through any kind of process.
So you looked at these 45%, and that's what you did. You stratified them and said, hey, this one's just a drive-in Culver's, so this is a drive-in Wawa. They've done 10 of them. You have 2.5 acres. It should work.
If we had these changes that we're talking about now, if we had those 20 years ago, we wouldn't have 45%.
Sorry.
Ms. Baird.
Hot mic.
If we have time, we could talk after this SRQ Tech thing.
Okay.
All right. We're back on.
So, I was saying that if we had these changes 20 years ago, we wouldn't have 45% of the county in PD.
So, and here's the other part of this then. So that's fine as long as retail changes every year. And so the requirements, so what we're seeing today in some of these product lines is not the same we saw 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So a multi-tenant building with drive-throughs on the side wasn't common 5 years ago. So the code has that. Now, I can talk over that. So is kept up to date, addresses things that are consistent, because otherwise you're going to do the same thing. 20 years later, you say, oh, of course it doesn't work.
And an answer to that?
That's coming up?
Working? Yeah. No, I lost my train of thought with that.
Forgive me.
Oh, yes. Now, the issue is that right now we have all those regulations in the comprehensive plan. Now, comprehensive plans are not supposed to be changing on a monthly basis. Comprehensive plans are the vision, right? Those types of requirements should be in the Land Development Code because the Land Development Code is supposed to be an evolving document. As things change, as the market changes, you should be able to, go through the Land Development Code and make changes to address those. And it's a lot easier to make an LDC change than to make a comprehensive plan change. As you know, it has to go through the state, and it's months and months and months, whereas the Land Development Code is just something that is internally done. So the LDC can address better changes in market, changes in development trends, changes in those types of things.
Pat, so again, let's not lose sight what we're doing here. This is the comprehensive plan. In addition to that, there's going to be a modification to the Land Development Code that would add additional detail. This is the broadest authorizations that would be sought for
Yes.
any particular application that
And
might be
what we're
submitted.
trying to do is taking some of that detail that doesn't belong in the comp plan, and then we'll talk about those details when we come back with the LDC.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions regarding PD?
Please continue.
Clustering. Clustering is one example that we have that makes you go through the special approval and the plan development and all that. And we looked at it in particular because we were like, why would you have to go through all those processes when it's something so obvious? Basically, what you do with clustering is you want to protect open space, environmentally sensitive areas. So to do that, you want the developer to concentrate the development in the upland portion of the site. Now, to do that, you have to, allow them to do smaller lots. Here's an example of the same property. On the right is what's on the ground now. On the left, it's what could have happened if we had allowed them to do clustering through an easy process. They could have saved this much area as open space, and they could have put their lots on the right like this. Now, when we go to the Land Development Code changes, you will see what we're proposing in terms of standards, how to protect the neighbors, how to maintain density and all that. But we want to, in the comprehensive plan, we want to say, no need to jump through all those hoops just to do clustering. The LDC will tell you how to do it. Any questions about clustering? Okay. Now, mixed use. So mixed use, as you have seen throughout the state and throughout the country, it is a good idea. We want to have sustainable communities. We want to have communities where you can walk to the store, you can walk to the bus station, you can move around, not relying so much on your car, or at least create shorter trips. So we have two mixed-use categories in the county, and both of those throw you into the plan development process. I had also mentioned before that the UF3 category tells you that you have to go PD. If you look at the size of UF3, it's huge. It's the whole eastern side of the urban area. Imagine if all that has to turn into PD. It's massive. And this is how much has already turned into PD. These are all the red ones and the yellow ones. Those are areas that have been rezoned to PD. The light green is agriculture. And the bright green shows properties that are vacant. So those are ready for development, and if they want to do development, they have to go through PD. So in 1989, when the county was developing the comprehensive plan, they came up with a great idea. And it was, we know that that whole UF3 area, it's going to tend to turn into subdivision after subdivision after subdivision. And they are going to need services nearby. So they created something called the commercial locational criteria. What that means is that a developer or a property owner can come in and say, I have the perfect intersection. I'm surrounded by residential. I want to put a neighborhood commercial node in this location. So that was a great idea, and they created the system to do that. Over the years, those nodes have happened, but they have to go through PD, and they have to jump a lot of hoops to do that. And they have been just commercial. They did not allow the residential component. So this is what commercial locational criteria looks like right now in your comprehensive plan. That is in an element called the land use operative provisions. It tells you how far you can go from the intersection, how deep, and it gives you all the details for that. So it's already in place. So what we want to do is use that same system, but make it easier for people to implement. Number one, we want to allow residential, because we know that those nodes, if you start combining apartments with retail, you have an opportunity to provide affordable housing and to make it even more attractive to the community around it. So the idea is to, in the comprehensive plan, clarify how to do this. And we're talking about whether it's going to be a small node, a medium node, or a large node. And that size depends on which land use categories you're in. So the smaller would be in the residential lower intensity, and the medium in the medium, and the large in the large. And then eventually, when we go to the Land Development Code, we're going to identify which zoning districts you could just apply for to implement these nodes. So any questions about those activity nodes?
Are the activity nodes tied to the classification of the roadways?
Yes. So that for certain nodes, you have to have an intersection of two arterials, or collector and arterial, or collector. So yeah,
Should the roadway classifications change? Would the node classifications change?
Not the node classification, but if it is still vacant, as soon as it changes, yes, whoever comes next will be able to do something larger.
And how about the projected road capacity? In other words, you have an intersection on the east side, they're growing up exponentially.
If there are plans for a roadway that we know it's going to happen, yeah, they could do that. Yeah, I mean, we could not approve a node without knowing for sure that there is going to be an intersection there. So, okay, now this one I think is the bottom line of all these changes. It's how to make the future land use map communicate with the zoning map. And this one has been challenging because, as you know, the future land use map is supposed to give you the vision for your county, and the zoning map is supposed to implement that vision. But as of today, we have so many future land use categories and so many zoning categories that are working independently from each other. They're not communicating. And as you can see on the right, the list of planned development districts, it's very extensive. Most communities have 1, 2, maybe 3 PD districts. Now, we're not proposing to make any changes to those at this time. We're going to keep those the same way that they are today. But we just want to minimize reliance on those. So one thing that we're doing in the comprehensive plan to try to create this communication between land use and zoning is that when you go through the policies, it describes, for example, residential 9. The comprehensive plan describes it, and then it says what kind of uses you can have there. But then it goes in such detail that it starts talking about hotels, and it talks about dormitories, and it talks about retail uses, and that does not belong in the comprehensive plan. Because what has happened is that when somebody comes to staff and they say, what can I do on my property? They have to look in the land development code, and then they have to look in the comprehensive plan to see if the use is mentioned or not mentioned. So we want to change that language to make it a little bit more general. And then this table, it's a little complicated, but I just want to explain a few things here. So this page shows just the residential future land use categories. We are not making changes to the density of those categories, the overall density, or the net density gross or net density. But we are making changes to the density if somebody's going to do affordable housing or if they're going to do residential in one of those activity nodes. And of course, we had already done that for commercial corridors. So you can see that if, for example, in residential 12, if your normal maximum density is 12, we're going to allow people to double that if they're going to do affordable housing or multifamily in those activity nodes. And the same thing with residential 16, going from 16 to 32. And the idea is that if you're going to do retail on the ground floor and apartments above, 12 is not going to get you there. So you need more density to do that. In terms of non-residential intensity, which is measured with, as a proportion of your building to your site, we realized that the county's FARs are very low. Even if you go all the way down to residential 16, which is multifamily, if you're going to do a non-residential use, a church, a school, or if you have a node, maybe a commercial node, they were at 0.23. That means small building, huge lot. What does that translate into? A lot of parking. So we want to increase those to 0.35. And some interesting fact is that most of these land use categories say, okay, we allow 0.23, but if you're a mini warehouse, you can do 0.35. If it is good enough for mini warehouses, it should be good enough for a convenience store or any other uses that we need in those areas. Now, we talked about the commercial nodes being small, medium, and large. We realized that when the plan was done in '89, they had assigned a medium size for residential 1 and 3. We believe that those are very low-density residential neighborhoods, that the size of the commercial node should be more like a small-size commercial node. So we're proposing to make that change. Now, for the non-residential future land use categories, here we are changing one density, and that's for mixed use. We're just going from 9 to 12. All the others are going to remain the same, unless you're doing affordable housing, activity nodes, and all that. In terms of intensity, same thing, we're adjusting them. And then we realized something. We, trying to make the comp plan more user-friendly, we ended up stating, this is back in '89, that if you're in a retail land use category, you can only do a large commercial. And we're like, if that's the place where you can do commercial, why couldn't you just do any size commercial? So we're cleaning up some of that. If it is a retail future land use category, allow them to do retail based on your zoning. And then later on, when we do the land development code, we'll explain this table in more detail, but basically we are going to have a table in the land development code that says, if this is your land use category, these are all the zoning districts that you're going to be able to request. Now, parenthesis here again, whenever you request a rezoning, the board is still going to have to review it. And even if the zoning district is mentioned in one of those categories, it doesn't mean that you have the right to get that zoning, because maybe you're surrounded by agriculture, maybe you're surrounded by lower densities. So it is something that you can request, but it's not a guarantee that you are going to get it. But at least it will be clear for staff to know which zoning districts could be consistent with the future land use. So just to summarize, so why are we doing this? We want to eliminate special approval and PD requirements for some activities and replace it with a different process for others. We want to increase densities and intensities in the urban core, activity nodes, and affordable housing. And we want to allow activity nodes based on that commercial locational criteria that you already have, but without having to go through PD. And then we want to create that table that I mentioned, so it would be a lot easier for people to understand the comp plan and the land development code. In terms of schedule, the plan right now is that we're going to go to the board in June for transmittal to the state. Then when it comes back from the state, it will probably be September, and that's when it would be adoption. And then we would come back to you in October with the land development code changes. And if everything goes according to plan, we should be able to have the land development code amendments adopted in December. Any questions, comments?
Mr. Rutledge?
So on the FAR in your proposal, are parking decks deemed part of the FAR, or are they free?
No, they're free. Parking garages, structured parking garages are not counted towards your
That's
FAR.
an inducement, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The definition of mixed use, so there's a lot of discussion about the term mixed use meaning fully integrated, and then urbanists will say that's a certain thing, developers may say it's something else. And so the term of multi-use is used as well. Would you define this more as an urbanist description of mixed use or more as a multi-use?
We'll iron out those details in the land development code because we're proposing some changes to that. But basically, we're talking about horizontal mixed use and vertical mixed use. So, we'll talk about, when we talk about the land development code and how we count the density. And
surprise for later.
And no, it means it is something that you will have a lot more time to have input on.
Okay. And Lisa, can you clarify these? Both the comprehensive plan and the LDC amendments are going through a process where the public's involved. Where's the information available when there might be a workshop or public presentation?
We have all of the information on our website. In November of last year, drafts of the amendments to the comprehensive plan and the land development code were published on our website. Then we had a public workshop at the library in January, and then another board work session, and then the Planning Commission work session that we had last month. So all of the amendments that are before you today were posted on our website probably about a month ago. Mm-hmm. They were refined from the draft that was posted in January or in November.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Can I ask one other question?
No. Go ahead.
I hear that all the time at home. Right? Deal. That's right. Come here for attention. So, do you believe this is the proposed language and the structures and so forth have been fully vetted throughout the community? And when I say that, I love to see all the engineers, but I have some soft spot for the transactional people. The people that sell it. Big developers, real estate people, and so forth. And so one of the things is there's different perspectives depending on where you sit in this process. And so I guess that was kind of my question. Has this been process that way yet?
Yes, I believe it has been. Like I said, we've been talking about this subject, this topic, actually for the 20 years that I've worked in the county. We've talked about why do we do it this way. It makes for an interesting job, but it's not the way that a business or a county should function. But with the current amendments, yes, we've advertised the workshops. We've discussed this at Planning Task Force. We have had the Manatee Chamber of Commerce. We go to monthly meetings with the Attainable Housing Committee, the Infill Committee. We've been to the Economic Development Council. And there are citizens that are not developers, they're just interested citizens that are part of our Planning Task Force as well.
Okay. That's great, thanks. For the past 20 years, I haven't noticed that, but.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Make a couple comments.
Sure.
Being the only one sitting up here or sitting at the staff table that was here when the comp plan was adopted and the land development code, and in fact I sat where Nicole was sitting over there at the time, I can tell you that I think there has been a change in the philosophy of the board. When the original comp plan and land development code were adopted, there was the philosophy of everything should go in front of the board. Everything should be negotiated. And it allowed for more politics to get included in the process. Now I think what they're doing is taking some of that out and streamlining some of it. So I fully support trying to simplify some of the regulations and make it where more developments can get approved administratively. I think that's a good thing. From school board's perspective, I do have an issue that I've discussed with them, and I'm just going to read this one paragraph into the record, if I may.
Yes, please.
What it says is schools have been planned based on the existing regulations and the allowable gross densities. There appears to be a major change in direction to allow densities to increase in some situations in the Res 3, Res 6, Res 9, Res 12, Res 16, the UF3, OL, ROR, MU, and possibly other future land use categories. This can create significant issues for school concurrency in developed areas where schools are already built, and there is little or no opportunity to expand existing schools and or property is not available to build new schools. Increasing density has benefits, but in some instances it may overburden the schools. If the county implements such policies, the board should be aware that there may be failures in a level of service and that the only way for a project to proceed would be through proportionate share mitigation. So to summarize that, what I'm saying is that we have, especially in the developed areas, our schools are in place. There's just not any additional land available. We cannot expand those schools. So as developments come forward, we may be opposing some of those developments if they're seeking density bonuses and we feel that we cannot accommodate them, or they have to provide some type of mitigation to meet our concurrency standards. Even then it may be tough. And I know that Pat looked at what the density increase could be, but that was only in the ROR and MU future land use areas. It's all the other ones that concern me, and I'm not opposed to it. I think it's, from a planning perspective, it is good, and that is exactly what I told staff. I think it's good to increase density and to try to concentrate it. I just need this board and the county commission to understand that there may be problems in the future, and so don't be surprised if you see the school district up here opposing a development if it's based on a density bonus.
Okay, thank you. And how is staff addressing some of the concerns with the school board? I don't know if it would be an instance where something would be approved administratively that would add a bonus. So is there some assurances that the process that would occur would include the school board? So an applicant may go through something and then suddenly realize they they have a proportionate share or some type of mitigation?
The process isn't changing. They would still have to apply for a CLOS, which is what they do today.
Right.
At time of horizontal, vertical construction, at time of final site plan approval. That will not change.
But typically, isn't there, during a rezone process, isn't there some assurance given with regard to concurrency related to school board? There's nothing.
The school.
Sue's shaking her head no. So.
You're not on.
They submit a report, but there is no. They don't reserve concurrency at the zoning stage.
Right.
That is done at the final
Not
site plan
concurrency,
stage.
capacity. It's capacity.
They do both.
Yeah.
Capacity, concurrency. There was a time when I think we were over capacity in some districts, and then there were statements that were included in the zoning. And this would happen, you know, I don't want y'all to think that you will never see a zoning again here, because you will. Our hope is that you won't see as many planned developments being forced to do planned development, because a lot of our property, even though the future land use may be for commercial or a different type of residential, the zoning doesn't match the future land use. So you will be seeing, hopefully, some more standard zoning that we're going to create the ability for people to rezone to standard. But the school board will still be, there is zero change in the process. So they will still be analyzing, you know, the number of units that would happen just like they do today. And then they would make their report and they would say those same language. You'll see it at the zoning stage, what they, you know, like if it's over capacity, the schools, then they tell, and then they say what the mitigating, what they need to do to mitigate those issues. Am I right, Mike?
Mr. Chair, we are involved in every review. Even a lot of our reviews are no comments. It will be a commercial or office where it just doesn't impact us. It's not near a school. But we review every development that comes before the county and the cities. And basically we're, you know, we probably have a better knowledge of what's going on in the county than the county does, because we look at not only Manatee County, but we look at the city of Palmetto, Anna Maria, Longboat Key. We look at all those things and collect all that data. So yes, we're involved in that process. If it's, the issue comes in that well, first of all, we don't issue a certificate of level of service. The county issue it's based on our behalf. But just like water and sewer, you don't get that certificate level of service, as Martha was saying, until you're approved for horizontal or vertical development. That means you've got your preliminary plat and construction plans approved. You're getting ready to build. So yes, we've told you there's capacity available or there's not, but that's changing all the time because people come in and they jump in line, they reserve it because they're ahead in the process. So you might not find out until the last minute that you have an issue. As a builder, you have an issue and there's no concurrency available. I will tell you that right now, that's not an issue. We, you know, because of the half-penny sales tax and impact fees, we're able to keep up with that, you know, that development right now. But I mean, things change.
Right. And I think that's a valid point. The modifications that are being proposed are represented to provide some level of assurance, and that the density could cause some concern with regard to if that assurance is valid.
Yeah, I mean, what it can do for schools, like I noticed in the staff report, it said there's, you know, density is good, basically. I'm paraphrasing. Density is good. It creates internal trips, and, you know, so people aren't driving all the way across the county to get to a store or to go to, you know, whatever use they're going to. But it's different for schools because, you know, more density just means more students generally.
Right.
And so, again, we're not opposed to it. We're just expressing the concern that don't be surprised if we run into a problem in the future.
Understood. And I think the same can be said with regard to the other services that are provided, and given concurrency, the water, sewer, roadway, all of that could be affected by increased density, so especially in developed areas. So thank you. Mr. Rutledge.
Yeah, so one of the things that some communities have done, and we were involved in it in Winter Haven, is where you have a shortfall of capacity, schools, water quality, fire, all those things. The community set up a structure. The structure was very clearly, if you are short one school desk and all the ancillary costs associated with that, it's worth this much. It cost me this much. Now, it implies that you have done your homework and said, when I get a new student, if this thing I have to build up because I can't find more land, but it doesn't mean you can't have more students. It means you have to do something, plan it, and say it's worth this much. And they set out that number in advance so that you don't hold somebody up to say, well, I'm not really sure, I haven't looked at that, I got to figure it out later. And so I would recommend that solution, then somebody can say, hey, it's too expensive, I can't do it. But you don't have to say you can't do it. You can say, yeah, you can do it, but this is the impact and the cost for you to do so. And I would propose that all categories of activity would have that speciality and say, hey, you want to build 5,000 apartments? Okay, here's your cost per unit for fire, water, sewer, and not hold them up and not say no, because you don't know. Like Hillsborough County just did this out where they want people to move out to I-4. I don't know if you saw that study where they're trying to put these nodes of life, like building cities out there. But they've got an economic structure at how to accomplish that. And so I would love to see when you got to the zoning to say, hey, look, we've analyzed these things, where we're going. We want to do these nodes because we think they're good, and I agree. But to do that, you have to be prepared to answer those questions. Say, okay, what does it cost me? Okay, I don't have schools. There's no sewer. The fire station's too far. Okay, pay this, and we can solve that.
And that detail will come with the land development code?
It will, but that's still part of our process today, as when they go through the development review application, those are the things that we take into consideration currently, and that's not going to change.
Well, and I was just saying to say about the schools that we don't have land or we don't have this. Everything's solvable. Usually it's just about money. So I just would like to make sure if we're going to ask people to do this and we're inviting them into this great process, let's make sure we can get them out the other side.
Thank you. Anything else? Staff, any additional comments? Thank you. No. Okay. So we're being asked to provide a recommendation. What's the oh, yeah. I forgot about it. So we've heard the presentation. Again, this is a judicial process. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter? Anyone?
Mr. Chair, I'm just pointing out this is legislative.
Did I say judicial?
Yes.
I'm just all messed up. Sorry, we're going to have to start the meeting over again. It's legislative, so there's no need to be sworn in. So, Mr. Schmidt, did you have something?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Bob Schmidt with Land Planning Associates. I just wanted to put on the record that I think this is all good stuff. It's stuff that we've been working on for a long time. I did want to seek some clarification on the land use operative provisions. Had a discussion with Lisa about this. I'd like there not to be a requirement to meet commercial locational criteria for office uses. Got some clients with large properties on, say, US 301 up in Ellington area, which have A1 zoning, and they don't meet commercial locational criteria. It's just not logical. Nobody wants to build a house or houses on US 301 with driveways accessing houses. I think that that's part of it, and I just wanted to put that on the record.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else wishing to come forward and speak on this matter? Anyone at all? Okay, come forward, please. If you would, just please state your name.
My name is Frank Maloney, and we own some land on 301. And we were following this process early on as far as the increased density, looking forward to some of the changes. Mm-hmm. The future land use on the property is ROR. The language that I looked at the other day has been changed from the earlier draft on the residential density, which was, we're in a Res 9, but we have three different zoning categories for three contiguous parcels. We've got a PDR, an A1, and a general commercial, but all three have future land use of ROR. So the question is, there was a term that was used in the first draft referring to commercial nodes, and then the criteria, commercial location criteria applied, and they were using 30 units an acre. The most recent draft has now removed that language and inserted urban corridors, which would allow for 32. Am I misunderstanding that change? Because
Mr. Maloney, I don't know that you'll get an answer in
I'm
this
sorry,
forum, but you'll have an opportunity. You've made a comment that has raised your concern with staff, and I think maybe you could address, get with them on that particular issue. They could probably provide some guidance.
Right, I didn't realize it was a Q&A back before.
It was just more a statement, a public statement, so thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. So you do have your points of contact here, so you know who to talk to. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, seeing nobody else come forward, we're going to close public comment. Is there anything else? Staff, Lisa, you look like you want to say something.
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to point out that we do
Yes, ma'am.
have a specific email address.
Yes, ma'am.
So if Mr. Maloney would send us, it's landjuice.org. We monitor that, and so if you would give us your specific
Right.
information and your specific questions, we can try to, look at that.
Or call.
Yeah, or call.
Yeah, so I think it's difficult without having additional detail. I'm sure y'all can vet his concern very quickly. So, anything else from the board? Okay. All right, Chair will consider a motion. We're being asked to provide a recommendation.
Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion. Based upon the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, the technical support documents, and finding the request to be consistent with the Community Planning Act as codified in applicable portions of Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida statutes, and the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, I move to recommend a transmittal of PA 1708 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. DeLesline, second. Is there any discussion or deliberation? Seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Right. So we're going to move on to our regular agenda. First thing we have are changes to the agenda. Ms. Knapp, are there any changes to the agenda?
There is a change to item number 7, PDR 1728ZP regarding SMR Northeast LLC Solera at Lakewood Ranch. Unfortunately, my cheat sheet doesn't tell me what that change is, but I think it's some revisions to the language in the staff report. And when we get to item 7, Rosina can clarify that for the record.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Schenk, is there any?
No changes.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item number 2, which is the approval of the minutes for April 12th and the April 23rd hearing. Have you all had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any changes or modifications required? Seeing none, Chair will consider a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the minutes for April 22nd, April 23rd meetings.
Thank you.
12th.
I said the 12th and 23rd.
Okay, thank you.
2018 minutes.
Thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Roth, second. Chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
You can still.
Oh, I'm in favor then.
So motion, Mr. Rutledge voted. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is for any item that is not on today's agenda. If anybody wishes to come forward and speak on a matter that, again, is not on today's agenda, please come forward. If you have a desire to speak on an application that is on today's agenda, you'll have an opportunity when that application is being heard. So anyone at all. Seeing no one come forward, we're going to close public comment. We're going to move on to the applications. So first thing we need to do is get everybody sworn in. So if you plan on speaking today, please rise to be sworn in. If you don't do it now, you'll have to do it later.
Do you swear or affirm that the factual statements and factual representations which you're about to present to the Planning Commission will be truthful and accurate? Thank you.
Thank you. So the first item, number 4, is Willis rezone. This is a presentation upon request. Ms. Knapp, can you please read item number 4 into the record?
Item number 4 is Z1807. It's Willis rezone. It's a rezone of approximately 5-acre site located at the southeast corner of the intersection of Erie Road and Erie Lane at 4906 Erie Road, from general agriculture to suburban agriculture zoning district.
Thank you. For the record, are there any ex parte communications regarding this application?
No, sir.
Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Okay, we had the introduction from staff by Ms. Knapp. We're going to move on to the applicant's presentation.
Sir, it's presentations upon request.
So, I would like to just hear the purpose of this. So, let's see. Just a short summary.
It's a rezone from A1, from A to A1. That's the short summary.
No further questions?
Is that enough? Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Board,
Yes.
my name is Leo Mills. I'm here representing the applicant.
Thank you.
And it is a rezone in an area that's supported by the A1 surrounding zoning. The wishes of my clients are to make it accessible to their son, which so he can build a house, which really doesn't make a bit of difference on this, but I thought I'd bring that up since you asked for a
appreciate
presentation.
it. Helpful. Appreciate it. We're trying to work through the presentations upon request, trying to streamline and identify the process. So
Well, I'm done unless you have any questions.
No, I think we're good. Are there any concerns with the commissioners? We all have the information in our packet and would have read it, so thank you. Thank you, sir.
Move to approve.
All right, so is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this application? Yes, sir, if you would, please come forward. And again, this is quasi-judicial and requires that you be sworn in. So if you would, please state your name and that you have been sworn.
My name is George Johnson, and I was sworn in with the group just a few minutes ago. I'm a volunteer at the property at the east end of Erie Lane, which is not far from the subject property. I'm not aware of any objections to the rezoning as proposed, but we have concerns ongoing and worsening about flooding, particularly along the east end of Erie Lane, all of the properties on both the north and south side. I have some pictures and things here which probably we don't need to get. I can leave them if you like.
If you show them, you have to provide them to the clerk for the record.
Everything I have here can be left. You're welcome to that.
Thank you.
The short end of this, and I know that you're pressed for time, is that the flooding in the property in the 17 years I've been working at the other end of the road has been getting steadily worse as construction has proceeded. There is a drainage ditch that proceeds from, crosses Erie Lane and goes down towards 301 through the general area. That ditch has not been cleaned out, to my knowledge, in at least 30 or 40 years. There are trees growing in that ditch. After a heavy rain, we can get as much as 3 feet of water standing along the south border of the properties there on the south side of Erie Lane. And any construction that occurs in this area, planned, permitted, or whatever, is going to aggravate this very, very worsening situation. I'm asking that this board and the attendant staff get that ditch cleaned out before there is any substantial construction, permitted or not, at this point in time.
Thank you.
Thank
you. And just for clarification, this is authorization for the change in zoning. Anything that involves construction would have to go through a separate process, and at that point, the county staff would vet the
Sir, I
issues.
understand, but there is a retention pond that is seasonal on the property in question that is part of the drainage.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else? Mr. Rutledge?
I just want to say, though, that my understanding, Thomas, is that when we bring something in to be rezoned and then redesigned, that is a positive towards the flooding issues as opposed to a detriment. The statement that Mr. Johnson made, implying that the new construction is causing more flooding, would be inconsistent with my thinking of what we do. Would you agree?
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
If I go ahead and answer the
Sure.
citizen comment and also the comments that were just raised
Yes,
by Commissioner.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the gentleman's name.
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson. If you would listen up, Mr. Gerstenberger is going to provide some information.
Thank you.
First off, for the record, Thomas Gerstenberger, Public Works Department, have been sworn. Mr. Chair, with respect to this particular rezone, the intent of the rezone itself, and I think Mr. Mills had brought it up as well, was basically for a certified lot split to basically take the existing parcel and split it into an additional parcel. That sort of a lot split, which is known as a certified lot split, for the individual lots for any home construction on those particular lots, they would go through a building permit, and associated with the building permit would be a drainage and grading plan. With respect to development within this particular area outside of this rezone property, this particular area lies within, it's basically at the divide of two particular watersheds, one being for Buffalo Canal watershed and the other one being for Slaughter Drain watershed. Both of those watersheds, the county has identified both of those watersheds as flood-prone areas, which do require 50% reduction in the allowable runoff rate of discharge based upon a pre-development condition. So any sort of residential development in this area, whether it be residential subdivisions or even if you're looking down at Erie Road and 301 as far as commercial development, any sort of development in this area would require that 50% reduction in allowable runoff rate. One other thing I would also note about the particular rezone property is the northern portion of the rezone property is located within the 100-year floodplain. So if there was any impacts such as fill within the 100-year floodplain, those would require compensation. And also for any other development in this particular area, whether it be located in the 100-year floodplain or even in some cases, the county map 25-year floodplain mitigation would also be required for any impacts within the 100-year floodplain. The particular drainage system, which Mr. Johnson is alluding to, is not maintained by the county. It's a particular tributary of Slaughter Drain that drains from north to south towards Erie Road, and then from there through Colony Cove, and eventually outfalls into the Manatee River. There are, just based upon what I'm seeing right now on the GIS mapping, there are very limited areas of that particular drainage system which are maintained by the county. However, we do require for developments as a whole, if they are on a particular drainage system which does convey county runoff, that they do provide either drainage easements or flowage easements for those particular systems. I'll be happy at this time to answer any additional questions that the Planning Commission may have.
Who maintains
it? Maintenance, it either falls to the individual property owners. As I was alluding to, it is not a county-maintained drainage system, and basically, with respect to any type of county maintenance, it would typically fall upon a county maintenance schedule for a routine inspection, for routine maintenance, things of that sort. It does not necessarily fall into that category.
So a drainage system belongs to the property people who abut it?
It is the responsibility of the individual property owners to maintain the flow of runoff. Basically, it boils back to the drainage patterns as a whole of the particular area. If, say, I'm a property upstream and I'm relying upon a property downstream for conveyance of runoff, it's the responsibility of those property owners to maintain the particular drainage systems, not to create any blockages, not to create any adverse impacts which might affect properties upstream.
How could that change?
If that could change, well, in this particular scenario, it could change if there was drainage easements through those particular private properties. Typically, there's one or two ways in which the county goes through to, if we're looking at as far as maintaining a particular system, it's either to get a release from the individual property owners to basically go in for access and for maintenance of those particular systems if a drainage easement is not in place, and otherwise it would be to obtain a recorded drainage easement from the property owner themselves.
Can the county, because of the way the drainage system is existing and the people who reside there or who abut there are not maintaining it, can they legally force them to maintain it?
Mr. Gersberg, isn't that the same as any other right that the property owner would have to grant or the county would have to take? It would be a condemnation. I mean, this is a right that the property owner has. They would have to give it to the county.
Mr. Chair, that is correct. It's basically done either through that release from the individual property owner or through the recording of a drainage easement.
So what we're saying in essence is, correct me if I'm wrong, if this has been going on for X number of years and the ditch exists, he needs to go to the individual residences or abutters to get them to spend the money.
It's a private matter. It's
private matter.
Yeah. So, all right, thank you.
But I just want to clarify my last point but when this particular zoning is approved, and if they build it and bring it through as a plan, as would typically be the case, the water issue will get better, not worse. That's my simple analysis. I always got to simplify.
If it's just going through a building permit, there's not a site plan related with an individual building permit. So typically, we do not see like the wholesale stormwater master drainage systems, things of that sort we would see for site development. If we're speaking for an individual lot with an individual building permit, the only requirements would be through the drainage and grading plan associated with the building permit.
Got it. Thank you. All right, thank you. No, I'm sorry, sir, we've already heard the public comment. If you have any questions or concerns, if you would, please get with
The
Mr.
properties in question flooded 3 times last year. There's a mile and a half of ditch that we're talking about.
Thank you.
This is not a very good answer.
Thank you. If you would, talk to Mr. Gerstenberger. Thank you. All right, any additional questions, comments on this matter? Do I? Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward? All right, closing public comment. Any discussion amongst the board? Or the commission? Seeing none, the chair will call the matter, will consider a motion.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. DeLesline.
Based upon staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and findings to the request be consistent with Manatee County Comprehensive Plan and Manatee County Land Development Code, I move to recommend adoption of Manatee County zoning ordinance number Z1807 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Roth. Any additional discussion? Chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. We're going to go on to item number 5. Ms. Knapp, can you read item number 5 into the record?
Yes, item number 5, which is also presentations upon request, is Plan Amendment 1801, Ordinance 1811, Rolf Nielsen Comprehensive Plan Amendment. This is a comprehensive plan amendment for a privately initiated amendment to the future land use map for Res 1 to MUCAC, a total of 5 acres on the east side of Lorraine Road, approximately 1/2 mile from the intersection of State Road 70 and Lorraine Road, located at 5517 Lorraine Road.
Thank you. Has there been any ex parte communications regarding this application?
This is legislative.
Sorry?
The item is legislative.
Oh, I'm sorry. We keep jumping back and forth. So if you had ex parte communication, doesn't apply to this. So, has the commission had an opportunity to review the information? Is there any additional presentation necessary? Okay, seeing none, we're going to open the matter for comment, public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this matter, this application? Anyone at all? Seeing no one come forward, we're going to close public comment. Any discussion, clarification, any information necessary? Okay, very good. So the chair will entertain a motion. Anyone?
Mr. Chair, based on the evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, the technical support documents, and finding the request to be consistent with the Community Planning Act as codified in applicable portions of Chapter 163, Part 2 Florida statutes, and Manatee County Comprehensive Plan, I move to recommend the adoption of the plan amendment PA 1801 as recommended by staff.
Thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Delesline. Any additional discussion? Okay, seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Ms. Knapp, can you please read the quasi-judicial item number 6 into the record?
Yes, this item, as well as presentations upon request, it's PDI 1722P, Calcutta Marine. It's a preliminary site plan to add approximately 9,900 square feet to an existing metal building for boat manufacturing and storage at the northwest corner of US 41 and I-275, commonly known as 2200 Frog Echo Road, in the Planned Development Industrial Zoning District.
Thank you. Has the board had an opportunity to review this? Is there any additional information or clarification necessary? Okay. Mr. Schmidt, did you have a desire to make a clarification?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Not really a clarification. I just want to point out that what you heard about the changes to the comp plan today, this is the case to really make this project is the case being made to not have to go through a public hearing process. This started as a building permit. Then it went to a final site plan. Then because it was own PDI, we had to go back through a public hearing process to do an open-air building to get boat molds out of the sun. So, again, kind of, it'll improve the matter, and we'd ask for your approval. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, for the record, has there been any ex parte communications? Okay. Seeing none acknowledged. We're going to go to public comment. I have one speaker card for this. Mr. Reed, if you would, please come forward, state your name and that you have been sworn.
Yes. My name is James Reed, R-E-A-D. I have been sworn in this morning. And I'd like to first thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning and to object to this approval. To give you a little background, I am an abutting landowner. I have 3 parcels that are close to this location. 2 of the properties abut the actual boat manufacturing facility. 1 is on the same street. Firstly, this notice just came to me on Thursday afternoon of last week. I'm a Maine resident. My wife is a Florida resident on this property. So I flew down last night. I'm not well prepared to vocalize all my objections, but I will make a few this morning. As I said in my opening, I have 3 parcels adjacent to this boat manufacturing plant. My properties surround the plant on the north and west sides, and there are residents on 2 of these properties. This area is contained many residents to the north and west side of this particular property, the boat manufacturing property. This appears to be possibly a non-conforming grandfathered use or an illegal use under the comprehensive plan, as it is a heavy industrial use in a mixed-use comprehensive plan category. It has significant odors and occasional noise. In fact, occasionally the noise starts at 4 a.m., as it was this morning when I drove by at 4:30 this morning. Clearly, this fits the definition of heavy industrial use. The mixed-use category does not allow heavy industrial use, which this clearly is. I am not sure why the expansions of the past have been allowed, and there have been a couple expansions since I have purchased my property back in 2009. This use has sole access from Bayshore Road, and you have to travel through residential streets to gain access to the boat manufacturing plant. There have been large semi-trucks, commercial trucks shipping boats through the residential neighborhood, as well as delivery vehicles, on substandard unpaved roads, traveling through residential neighborhoods. Additionally, I'm concerned about the possible pollution in the area from this use, and I'm concerned particularly because the residents in the area are on wells, not public water. The county water is not available because it would have to go under the CSX Railroad, and we're not allowed to do so. I've tried. My well on one of my houses is 20 feet from their property line. The property also has a stormwater drain that is fairly active, that runs right along their border and dumps into the Frog Creek, which I think was voted one of the prettiest creeks in Florida a few years ago. There was an article written about it. So this is also a concern regarding the pollution, not only the contaminants from the outdoor sanding, but the runoff, the contaminants in the area, and my wells. In general, I have no objection to development in the principal development. I'm a construction worker. I build buildings. But this is an expansion that is not in the right place and should not be allowed.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present, and I do appreciate the time.
And for clarification, the noticing there's a specific time period for noticing. I'm sure the applicant met that requirement, but you'll have an opportunity. If this will move forward, regardless of what happens here, we'll move forward to the board. So you'll have an opportunity to address your concerns there also.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who wishes to come forward and speak on this application? Anyone at all? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close public comment. And any discussion from the board? Mr. Rutledge.
I had one question. Do we know when the boatyard initiated its conduct there?
I do not.
Chair, since there was opposition, we have to allow the applicant an opportunity to rebut it.
Right. Before we go to rebuttal, though, let's discuss amongst the Planning Commission. Is there any other concerns that need to be addressed? Okay. So seeing none, we're going to call the applicant for rebuttal. Mr. Schmidt, could you address Mr. Rutledge's question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The boatyard has been there for about 20 years. And prior to that, it was used by the circus to have manufacturing of some circus-related trucks and that sort of thing. The comp plan, when the comp plan was changed in 1989, the zoning was changed from M1, manufacturing, to PDI, Plan Development Industrial. The county did it. And as I said, sometimes you get tagged with that, and it was not initiated by the property owner. So I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I guess there's really no need for staff closing comments. So any discussion amongst the commission? All right, seeing none, the chair will consider a motion. Anyone?
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
I'll make
Ron.
a motion. My question in making the motion is, can I ask that the motion that's being recommended be
Yes.
taken as it is instead of reading it into the
Yes.
record?
Yes.
Okay. So is there a certain verbiage to say that, or just say,
Recommendation as presented by staff.
okay, recommendation as presented by staff? Thank you.
We're not trying to put words in your mouth, but.
Well, actually, you say, I move the recommended
Okay.
motion.
I move to recommend the motion as recommended by staff.
Thank you. We have a
I still
motion.
want to read that whole thing.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Ross, second. Any discussion or deliberation? Seeing none. Mr. DeLesline.
I guess could we have another clarification of, is the use permitted, the current use permitted in the zoning?
We have Ms. Shank, we have a motion and a second. Can we have additional testimony?
Well, I think you can ask staff that question.
Okay.
You have to reopen the public comment if you're asking other people to comment on it.
Reopen public comment?
I think you should just ask staff that
Okay,
question.
okay, all right. Ms. Moreland. Good morning. Thank you. I don't know that your mic's on, though.
I'm sorry, too. I lost my voice.
Maybe it is on. I don't know.
Yes, the use is permitted in the PDI zoning district.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions? All right. Again, we have a motion and a second. Is there any deliberation amongst the commissioners?
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. So thank you. So, that brings us to item number 7. Ms. Knapp, can you please read item number 7 into the record?
This item also is on presentations upon request. It's PDR 1728ZP, SMR Northeast LLC, Solera at Lakewood Ranch. And there were changes to the staff report and strike-through and underlying format presented to you this morning. A rezone of approximately 278 acres located 1.3 miles north of State Road 70, approximately 2 miles south of State Road 64, and 1.5 miles east of Lorraine Road, off of Uline Road, from general agriculture to planned development residential zoning district with a preliminary site plan for 675 lots for single-family residential detached development.
Thank you. Ms. Knapp, the changes you said earlier, you didn't have a summary, but Ms.
I confirmed just now when I was reading the item into the record, it is changes to your staff report and strike through an underlying format.
Okay, all right. I think everybody has a copy of that. So, okay, and again, this is quasi-judicial. Have there been any ex parte communications regarding this matter?
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing none disclosed, we're going to move forward. Is there, I know we just got information this morning, I glanced through it this morning early, but has anybody, hopefully everybody's had an opportunity to review it, are there any questions for this matter? Since it is a presentation on request, we're going to try to focus in on specific matters of concern. So does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns regarding the application information?
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing none, we're going to open this application up to public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to come forward and make a statement or raise a concern on this application? Anyone at all? Anyone? Okay, seeing no one come forward, we're going to close public comment. And again, the chair is going to ask if anybody has any need for clarification.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Roth.
I'm reading the notice to Mr. Krim, and I just want to be certain that I understand that this is part of the 6,355 single-family detached units on 627,000 square feet, et cetera, 659 senior housing units, 700 apartments. This is just one part of the total. We did speak about this at a prior hearing, I believe. Not this particular section, but the remainder of it. Am I correct?
Staff, can you answer Mr. Roth's question?
Good morning, Rosina Leider by staff, and it has been sworn. This case is south of Crestwind that was approved last month, and is part of the northeast quadrant that is zoning under the MUC, future land use category, and is we have this application. The other one was for senior residents. This doesn't. The applicant didn't says that going to be for senior residents, and it's only for single family detached.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions for staff, or any questions in general?
Yes, sir.
Okay, seeing none, Chair will entertain a motion. Anyone?
I'll move to accept the recommendation as submitted by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. DeLesline, since I was looking at you. Any additional comments? Okay, seeing none, the chair will call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Chair votes aye. Motion passes 5-0. So that concludes our published agenda. As we have already heard, item number 8. Is there any additional business for the commission? Okay, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you.